You ever meet someone who acts like they own everything just because they've lived somewhere longer than you? It's Karen. The moment I met her, I could practically feel her self-importance radiating off her like perfume strong, lingering and completely unwelcome. It was my second weekend living in the Crestmont Hills condo community, and I was still getting used to everything. I'd just moved in after buying the place from the previous owner, and things were finally starting to settle down. My cousin Marcus was visiting for the weekend. He's a college sophomore, all energy and protein shakes, and the two of us were excited to get a workout in at the on-site gym. The gym was part of why I chose this complex in the first place. It was small but clean treadmills, free weights, squat rack, even a punching bag. So that Saturday morning, Marcus and I headed over with towels, water bottles, and earbuds, ready to get started. I punched in the code at the door and held it open for him, and we stepped inside to the familiar smell of rubber mats and faint citrus cleaner. A few people were already working out. Everything seemed normal until I heard the sound of someone dramatically stepping off an elliptical like they were about to conduct an interrogation. "Excuse me," came the voice, sharp and clipped, like she practiced that tone in front of the mirror. I turned around, and there she was, Curran. Short blonde bob, pink tracksuit that probably cost more than my TV, and those oversized sunglasses perched on her head, even though we were indoors. She marched toward us like we were trespassers. I blinked, caught a little off guard. "Sorry." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Marcus. "Visitors aren't allowed to use the gym. This facility is for residents only." Marcus looked at me, eyebrows raised. I'm with him," I smiled, trying to de-escalate. "Yeah, he's just here for the weekend. And we're only going to be in here for half an hour." Karen's eyes narrowed like I'd just confessed to robbing. "A bank doesn't matter. Guests are not allowed. It's a liability issue, and it's against HOA policy. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone bringing guests. Now, I get it, some people like rules. But this wasn't about rules. This was about control." I could already tell she thrived off telling people no and slapping imaginary rule books in their faces. She probably organized clipboard patrols and reported kids for riding bikes on the sidewalk. I tried to stay calm. "I actually checked the welcome packet," I said. She huffed. "That was before rules change? Can't just assume?" I glanced around. No one else seemed to care. A guy was benching in the corner. A lady was on the rowing machine with AirPods in, but Karen, she was locked in on us like it was her personal crusade. "Look," I said, "he's not going to be running wild in here, spotting me. We're being respectful. We'll wipe things down." Karen stepped even closer. "You will be reported. There are fines for violations like this. You might be new here, but some of us work very hard to keep this place safe and respectable." At that point, I felt the smile freeze on my face. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want Marcus's weekend visit to turn into some ridiculous HOA showdown. But I also didn't appreciate being treated like some kid sneaking into a luxury spa. So I just nodded and said, "Sure, thanks for letting us know." Karen smirked like she'd won something, like she'd kicked 2 criminals off her sacred turf. She muttered something into her phone, probably documenting the incident, then strutted out of the gym with the triumphant energy of someone who just banished evil from the land. When she was gone, Marcus turned to me, deadpan. "Yo, who was that?" I laughed, even though I was still annoyed. That, my friend, was a Karen. No HOA SWAT team crashed through the windows, but the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. It wasn't the confrontation. Really, it was the assumption. The entitlement. Just because she'd lived there longer, and that's when I remembered something important. Karen had no idea who I was. She didn't know that I wasn't just a tenant or a new homeowner. I wasn't subleasing or renting short-term. I had bought to be directly from Dan Whitmorth, former HOA president who had moved out suddenly due to work relocation. Position until the end of his term. I hadn't made any official announcements yet. Honestly, I wanted to ease into it. I'd just moved, and I didn't want to stir things up too fast. But I had full access to the governing documents, the resident complaint logs, even the key fob system. And I knew, without a doubt, that Karen was bluffing. The bylaws clearly stated, Asterisk residents may bring guests to amenities such as the gym or pool, provided they are accompanied at all times. Asterisk no gray area, no ambiguity. Karen wasn't upholding rules, she was inventing them, and as HOA president, I suddenly realized I had every reason and every right to do something about it. So I spent the rest of that day reviewing every complaint she'd ever filed. There were dozens. Room for using the pool after 7:45 p.m. when the official closing time was 9. She once complained that a neighbor's dog blinked too loudly. Town, and he was done playing nice. The email went out Sunday evening. I kept it simple, professional. No flashy formatting, no dramatic wording, just a calm. It's a direct subject line that read, Community Gym, Policy Clarification, and Monthly Board Agenda. Inside, the note welcomed residents to attend our regular HOA meeting scheduled for Tuesday evening in the community room. I made sure to include one particular item on the agenda that would catch the right kind of attention. Asterisk reaffirming amenity access rules, including guest usage. Just vague enough to be subtle. Just pointed enough to set off Karen's internal siren. Sure enough, when Tuesday rolled around, the room was busier than usual. Normally, these meetings barely drew more than 3 or 4 people in. That's if we bribed them with donuts, but this time, nearly 20 chairs were filled. People leaned against the walls, murmuring softly, some with arms crossed, some clutching those little rule pamphlets like gospel. Right in the front row, naturally, sat Karen. Pink blazer, thick stack of papers, hips pursed. Ready for war? I walked in with a clipboard and a smile. Didn't need a gavel or a badge. I just stood at the center of the room and said, thank you all for coming tonight. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet yet, I'm Ryan, Unit to Be, and as of last week, I've stepped in as your new HOA president. Instant silence. Asterisk Karen's eyes widened, just slightly. I saw her grip her folder tighter. Could tell she was calculating rewinding everything she'd said too. Me in the gym 2 days ago. Probably replaying it all in her head and realizing she had made one very large mistake. I continued. Before we get to the other agenda items, I want to take a moment to address some recent confusion about gym access. Specifically, who is allowed to use the gym and under what conditions. I pulled a sheet from my folder and read directly. Provided they remain present during their use, that includes the gym, the pool, the tennis courts, and the lounge. I paused, looked directly at Karen. She didn't blink. Her face was frozen like a porcelain doll's. In other words, I went on. If a resident has a friend or family member visiting and they're present, they are allowed to accompany that guest in any of our shared amenity spaces. This has been the rule for over 5 years. It has not changed. One of the older residents raised his hand. So, it's always been allowed, because I've heard people say otherwise? Unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation spread over the past few years, often by people who were not on the board, but believed they had the authority to enforce rules. A few people glanced toward Karen. She didn't move, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. Another resident, a middle-aged woman from the East Building, added, Yeah, I got yelled at last summer for bringing my niece to the pool. Someone said, I was violating safety regulations. I nodded. Not a violation. That would only apply if the guest was unaccompanied or disruptive. Asterisk, that was the tipping point. The floodgates opened. A young couple shared that their friend had been turned away from the gym by some woman with a clipboard, tired of being shamed. The more stories that came out, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just about the gym. It was about control, fear, power being used like a leash. Karen finally spoke. Her voice had that shaky calm of someone trying very hard to sound composed while inwardly seething. With all due respect, Mr. President, safety is a concern. We can't just let strangers roam around. The amenities are. For residents, that's how we maintain order. I looked at her steady and calm, and I agree. Safety is important, but we don't maintain order by inventing rules. We do it by enforcing the ones we already have. No more, no less. She tried again, but there are people who abuse the system. I've seen it. Kids roughhousing in the pool, people using weights improperly. Those are behavior issues. I interrupted, still calm. They should be reported and documented. That's our process. But no resident will be reprimanded simply for bringing a guest unless that guest causes a problem. And no resident has the right to act as an enforcer. Unless explicitly authorized by the board. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. She could see where this was going, and it wasn't in her favor. I turned back to the group. One more thing, I added, lifting a second page. We're implementing a new clarification clause, effective immediately to protect residents from harassment. Anyone who falsely claims authority, confronts others aggressively, or threatens fines without board consent will receive a formal written warning. A second violation will result in a 30-day suspension from shared amenity access. This includes the gym, pool, and all other facilities. I let that sit for a moment. The air in the room felt thick and buzzing, not tense, just alert. Like people were realizing that something important had just shifted. Karen looked like someone had just told her they were paving over her rose garden. She stared down at her papers, but she didn't flip a single page. After the meeting, people lingered. Some shook my hand, others just nodded. A few quietly thanked me, the kind of thanks that comes from people who've spent years biting their tongues. Karen slipped out during the mingling, her binder hugged to her chest like a security blanket. That night, Marcus and I went back to the gym. We brought headphones, towels, and matching "I'm with the president" t-shirts we'd made earlier. As a joke, a few people in the gym nodded or gave a little wave. The atmosphere was different, lighter, more open. For the first time, people weren't glancing around nervously like they were about to be scolded for using the wrong equipment. Karen didn't show up in the following weeks. She kept her distance. I think she finally realized that fear and volume no longer worked, that her imaginary rulebook had been shredded and replaced with something real: community, clarity, and accountability. The truth is, she never had the power she thought she did. She just counted on everyone else not knowing the rules. But now, we all do.